Oh, to get the FK, just right click, set foreign key.
Oh, set foreign, okay.
So what I was going to do real quickly is if it's here, I'm going to do Excel. All right. And I'm just going to do a blank spreadsheet. What I want to do is to show you what the data might look like. So let's say that we have a data of computer. And I'm not going to do all the fields, but I'll do like, so computers this, I'll do computer number, computer ID. And I'm just going to do the location. Okay. So let's do, over here I'm going to do location. And we had location ID. And we had building, room. So I'm not doing everything, but I just want to show a big, so these are sort of the headings that are in the entity. So let's say that location 1 is building BE. They call this Broadway Edison, so that's what BE. And the room is 31. I'm going to do 76D. That's my office, and there's only one computer in there. So I'll do my computer number is 1, and the location is 1. And then I'm going to do location 2, BE, and this one will just be in the office in general, 3176. And the computer number is 2, and the location is 2, and well, there will be another one there, but the location is still 2, and 4, and 2. Does that make sense? These are all in the same location, but they're different computers. So one location here could have many. This one only has 1, but this one has 3 at this point. Does that make sense at all? That's what, so every location is only going to be listed once. And but over here on the mini side, it can be listed many times. Right? These have to be unique because this is the primary key, but this is a foreign key. Foreign keys can repeat as often as needed. I don't know if that makes sense. For what it's worth, we're going to spend lots of time on this, so you'll get lots of practice. That's big, and I want to minimize that. So we list the location once, but each location can have many computers. One location, many computers. Let's do another similar kind of thing. It's not in the same realm, but this one might make more sense. Let's do department.
Sorry, how did you do foreign key again?
I just right-clicked and did set foreign key.
Oh, that doesn't show up when I right-click.
So you have to right-click it so that it has these kind of handles on it.
Yeah, your first left click is to get those little, yeah.
So you have to kind of, yeah, you have to left-click on it, right-click. One of the things about Microsoft products in general that can drive you nuts is a lot of things are only accessible through the right, right key. It's not super important that it be there because it's a foreign key whether you label it as such or not. Let me, maybe before I do this, I'm just going to do some text. Why is that not moving? Okay. So I'm just going to write a couple of things for us. There are 3 kinds of relationships. Let me make that bigger too. Need a pointer again. So there are three kinds of relationships. Do you guys know what they are? Anybody? Well, so this is parents are the parts of the relationship, but like the parent would be the one side and the child the many side. When I'm looking for things like there are one-to-one relationships. We'll talk about those in a second. They're very rare. One-to-one relationships are very rare. It basically means that for every record in one table, there's exactly one matching record in the other table. Okay. And that is a legitimate relationship, but you'll almost never encounter it. One of the times it is sometimes used is if, for say security reasons, you have a table with all of your employees in one, all the public information about an employee in one table, and all the private, HR in another table. So there's exactly one private record for every public record. Does that make sense? It's the same employee. That's one of the scenarios where you have one-to-one. There's a couple of other little scenarios where you might have one-to-one, but it is a very rare relationship. You could build a lot of databases and never encounter a one-to-one relationship. But it is legit. I mean, there's nothing that makes it illegal. Typically, one-to-one relationships have the same primary key. Right? They actually have the same key because it's literally one-to-one. The one that is 90% of your relations, the one we were just working on, is one-to-many. Okay, so let me move this. If I move this over? No. This is again like one location, many computers. I'm going to do another one for you that's real common. I'm going to call this one department. And I'm going to do department key. I'm not going to do all the fields for department. And then I'm going to do another entity, and I'll call it employee E. And I'll give the employee a key. And I'll give it a department. Okay, so, and then I'm going to do the relationship. I'm actually going to paste. Whoa, still things. So let's undo that. I keep pasting my whole thing from this morning. I'm going to copy this. I just want the bigger sides without having to go format it again. Paste. I really hate these sometimes. This is the one side. One department can have many employees. Does that make sense? Each one department can have many employees. So the department key there is the foreign key that says that it could have. This only works as long as employees can only be in one department. But otherwise it gets complicated.
So the only way to reverse it is manually drag that many to the other side, or is there right click option?
I think you have to drag it. Yeah. If you find a keystroke that does it, let me know. I don't know one. Does that make sense for one-to-many? One-to-many is what 99% of your maybe even 99.9% of your relationship should be when you're doing a database, a relational database. Yeah,
You said there were three. Is the last many-to-many?
correct. So the very last is many-to-many. Many-to-many is a perfectly legitimate relationship, but it has the drawback that no database can do it. Okay. If you think about the logic of many-to-many, it just doesn't work, right? Let me do a many-to-many relationship. I'm gonna make a new screen down here, just because I'm running out of screen room on that one. So I'll show you a typical many-to-many relationship. This is going to be student, and this one will be class. I'll do a student ID and then a class number, whatever. So what is the relationship between student and class? I kind of gave it away. It's actually many-to-many. If you think about it, each student can take many classes. Each class contains many students, right? So there's a many-to-many relationship there. In modeling, that's perfectly fine. And you can actually have the crow's foot on both sides, right? But the database itself can't resolve that. What happens if you have a many-to-many relationship in the database is that you can't enter a student until you enter a class, but you can't enter a class until you've entered the student. It basically creates an infinite loop. And the software just can't handle it. You can't do a many-to-many relationship. Weirdly, when we get to NoSQL databases, they handle those all the time. But that's because they don't have any kind of relationships set up. But there's a solution to this. And actually, this is a really important part. If you can remember this out of everything, and we'll go over this again, but the way to solve a many-to-many is to add another entity. And this entity is usually called a linking table. And I'm just going to call it student class. And I'll give it an ID, although there are other ways to deal with it, which we could talk about later. All right, and then I'm going to do the student ID. I'm going to do the class number. And then what'll happen is I'm going to do one student, right? One student can take many classes. What you want is for the box to turn gray or green there. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. Okay, so I'm going to do one class can have many students. So what you do is you take the many-to-many relationship and you create a third table so that it becomes two one-to-many relationships. One student, many classes. One class, many students. Anytime you have a many-to-many relationship, that you need to create a linking table. Now, the hard part when you're first starting out is recognizing many-to-many relationships. You know, that takes a little bit of work. I mean, just practice. It's not something that's natural necessarily, but whenever you can see, like, again, one student takes many classes, each class has many students. Whenever both sides can talk to each other in terms of many, then you need to create a linking table that combines them and does that. Another common one for this is author and book, because a book can have many authors, right? It's not uncommon for multiple people to author a single book, or you have a collection you know, the stories or something. So one book could have many authors, but one author could also write many books. So it has a similar kind of structure, author, book, and then a combination, a linking table that combines the authors with the books. All of this makes for tables that, like this is just going to have numbers in it probably. You know, it's not going to be particularly readable, but the computer can use it to resolve things. And when you're creating a relational database, you're creating it for the computer to read. And then the part that we're not going to do in this class, when you build the web forms and you build the software to look at the database, then you bring it back together in ways that people can understand. We will do some queries which bring things back together too, so you can see the data in one place. You look dubious, so you just. So questions on that so far?
So you have student class, then you have the primary key is student class again.
Well, actually, so I should probably do like student class ID or something.
Oh, okay.
So we'll talk a little bit more about these relations because it takes a while. I don't expect this to sink in right now. You know, if you've played with databases before, it might, but if you haven't, it's going to take a while to get the feel for how these things work. The way we're going to get the feel is we're going to do lots of we're going to build a couple of databases. We'll talk about them a lot. We'll spend some time on them. Let's see what else. This is so I'm not sure why. This took the whole time last time, but so this is as far as we got in the morning. Couple of other things. Let me go back to the earlier page one. So a couple of things just to repeat. There's basically the three kinds of relationships. One-to-one you hardly need to worry about, as I said, because it's really rare. One-to-many is what you want pretty much every relationship to resolve to. Many-to-many, you should always create a linking table to add on. You can remember that. You've got a lot of it down already. There's a few other little aspects of this to cover, but what questions do you have so far? Part of the point of the, yeah.
As far as where you're going to play the first and everything, I understand now which one you're going to, but does it matter if it's on the line just below it or directly?
It doesn't matter where it is. In fact, Visio makes it really hard to put it where you want it.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
When you have a many-to-many, and
Yeah.
then you create a big one, so are you turning the two ones that you had into ones? So kind of like one.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what you're doing. So when you come down, let's go to page 2. You're turning a many-to-many because between these two is a many-to-many. So you just don't do that relationship. What you do is you turn it into two one-to-many relationships.
Okay, and you want.
Yeah. So that's, yeah, you were right.
It's always like that?
It is always, yeah. Basically, as I said, the computer can't handle a many-to-many relationship in this context. It just ends up being essentially an infinite loop. It's just part of the way computers process things. So we have to break that out. Yeah.
When you make the connection between those two, is it for both ways or can I do one to the other one to the first one to the other?
You don't want to do it in the wrong direction. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if I have your question right. But if I were to flip this the other way, it wouldn't work.
But is it going like both directions or just one direction?
It basically goes, so you enter every student once, but their number can be many times in this class. So it basically goes from this direction. It goes towards the 3 prompt. When you're entering data, you have to enter this first and this second.
It
This
is a
version,
two-way
this
street, though. You can either enter the class or you can enter the student. It will both go to the student class.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you have to go through the whole loop. You can type in one or the other, but you can't type in student class. That's all.
So you'd have to fill this, you'd have to have data in here and in here before you can do this. So there is a sequence, there is a flow to it once you've set up the constraints. One of the things that a foreign key does, these are both foreign keys, I didn't put them as such, but one of the things that foreign key does is it says you cannot have any value in this column that isn't in this table. You can't have any value in this column that isn't in this table. So you can't have any students here that aren't listed as students. And you can't have any classes here that aren't listed as classes. It's what's called data integrity. It protects you from having students that aren't registered anywhere else, from having classes that don't exist, things like that. It protects the integrity of your data. Yeah.
Would you make the student class secure so there could be no data entry into it?
I wouldn't, because you have to enter the data. One of the things, these won't self-populate or anything.
No.
You have to do the entry. A lot of people with linking tables and foreign keys believe with some logic that they will auto-populate, but they won't. Now, when you have forms, you're working, this may be why people believe that, when you're working on web forms or something, the software will look up the keys and place it for you. So you never have to deal with those numbers. But if you're working directly with the database, you have to type it in. So you can't actually make it just read only. You could, for certain users, you can make it read only. You know what I mean?
But at some point, somebody has
to put this stuff in it. Yeah.
I mean, technically, by registering someone for a class, you are creating that link. If you delete them from the class, you're deleting the entries in the database, right?
Right. So that's another thing relational integrity does. So I could delete a student out of a class at any time, but I can't delete the student if they're registered for a class. Right. So you have to delete from the child. You have to kill the child before you can kill the parent. You have to delete from here before you can delete from here. But you can remove somebody from a class at any time here and add them, as long as it exists over there. Other questions? These are all good questions. To show you're thinking about them at least. Anything else? So there are other things to cover. Let's look at the, so I might down this a little bit. I'm going to go to Canvas again, see what else we need to cover for the assignment. Now, one of the things for the assignment, we still probably have a little bit to go over for that. Let's go to modules. How's a better list? All right. So in the first, this one is the very first assignment, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe I should, and it says October 4th, but we'll see, is to create an entity diagram for this thing. So part of what we're doing, the diagram would contain the whole table. I think before I have you do this assignment, we'll do a little bit more of one ourselves as a class. And then I say basically how to turn it in. I say it should be normalized, and I'll talk about that too. I don't know if I want to talk about it today with just a half hour or so left. Partially because it's a complicated topic. So if I go back to the modules, a couple of things. What I'm going to do, I think, is call it pretty much, but I want to tell you what things you can look at if you want to. We don't have a book, but we do have in the modules here, there's the development process, which kind of covers what we talked about today, and then relational design, which is basically a PowerPoint that talks about entities and attributes and keys and foreign keys and relations and one-to-many and one-to-one and many-to-many, linking entities, and gives some examples of that, plus some references at the end. So if you wanted to look at that to reinforce what we did, that might be a good thing. The other thing is that on the, although I'm going to go to the syllabus real quickly. If you go to the blog, there's the one we did this morning. And if I were to do, I'm not sure what happens if I turn for, I'm going to just type in database relationships. I'm not sure. So this gives some things about, that's more, ooh, those are different things. Have nothing to do with us. Okay, never mind. That doesn't work. But there are stuff in the blog, particularly if you go back to the 220 blog from the past, if you want to look. But the thing is that it's at the beginning. They're kind of in reverse order, the blogs. So the stuff we do at the end is at the top, right? So you'd have to go down and look. But there are some other, like here's an ERD from last January. More useful, perhaps, if we go back to the syllabus, there are the YouTubes, and they're, you know, the entity relation diagrams, requirements. There are some videos in here. I think actually the most useful thing if you're going to do something would probably just be that PowerPoint, though. Because otherwise you're going to have to search, back and search. And I didn't make a list. I should make a list of which ones are relevant from the past.
So in files, where
So you can do it through files. Probably the easiest way is to go to modules and then relational design. You can also do normalization if you want. That's what we're going to talk about next time. And there's a little bit of a, I mean, if you want to look at these, we'll talk about normalization next time.
So do we need to look at the files section and the constraint with it or what's there? Because I see a lot of different, some things are relevant to Vincent Final, some aren't.
So Vincent's Final, once we start it, if you want to look at the assignment, the very first thing there is a PDF. And what it does is it describes the database.
So go for modules.
Yeah, modules is the easiest place to get stuff in this class because I've basically grouped things. These are just informational, right? So these are all just, they're Google Slides actually. And then down here, this is the first group of things that we're going to do as assignments. And there's still a little bit more to cover. We need to talk a little bit more about relational design and a little bit about normalization and a little bit about business rules, which we can do probably Monday. And by the end of Monday, I think we can start working on the assignment. And I don't assume that all of this stuff will be deeply ingrained in your brains by then. I'm just assuming that you'll have enough that you can start to flounder, which is fine.
So for this assignment, we'll just have to make up our own data or?
You will eventually make up your own data. We'll design, so what it goes through the process, we'll create the diagram like we were doing today. With
and just make up whatever keys they want.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I mean, keys that sort of belong. And one of the ways is just to auto number things, but you can do keys with the fields that we want. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about them all. We'll do a kind of a group debrief after people have worked on them. And one of the things that I want to happen is for you guys to work in groups to do this. I'm going to grade you individually, so you can all turn in your own. But if you work in groups, I think it helps because you can discuss the process and what would work. Then we're, as a whole group, we'll go through what people have and talk about the very, because there's one of the things about a database is there isn't an absolute correct answer, right? It can vary depending on the needs and how you define them. So we'll look at that and we'll discuss it. And then people can revise their diagram. Then we will actually create the database in SQL Server. So we'll take the diagram and we'll make it into a database, an actual physical database. We will add sample data, and I'm just going to have you make up data. And it won't be a lot of data. Data entry is a pain in the butt. I'm thinking of 5 to 10 records per table. And then when we do the testing of this, this is where I'll introduce some SQL. So you can do some queries of the data and see if you can get back some of the information that you want and seeing if you can enter the data you want. If you can't enter the data or get it back, then that's usually a sign that there's something wrong. One of the useful parts about entering some data is you can see if your tables work or not. Does that make sense? And then there's a quiz, which, as I said, is like, I think it's 10 multiple choice questions. You get 3 tries, and you can use the PowerPoints and the internet and ask me if you have to. So they're not meant to be hard. Once we've finished that, so we will have gone through a whole cycle of building a database, modeling it, building it, testing it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do it all over again with a different database and a different software. We use MySQL instead of SQL Server. But we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll design it, revise the design, create it. These are out of order, but we'll do sample data, put in some sample data and write some SQL to test it. And then there's a quiz with the same thing. And then the last thing we'll do is we will create a new database, but this time we're going to use Mongo. It's a NoSQL database. So instead of tables, we're going to look at what the typical JSON might look like for it. So that's JavaScript. It's not hard, but it's a very different feel than from the relational databases. This is a PowerPoint. I'm not sure why it's not like with the others. And then we will create the database and we'll add a little data to it, which again is a different process. These are really out of order, but then, and we'll do some queries. Queries are very different too. They're not done in SQL, they're done with JavaScript. But I think this is kind of a fun change too. It gives you a different feel for, and again, it's a really in-demand skill to work with NoSQL databases. So that's what we're doing for the rest of the time. What we'll start on Monday is we'll finish talking about normalization and design and maybe do one together, and then we'll start on Vince's final. That sound okay? You don't really have anything to do this weekend unless you want to look at the rational design and the normalization. I wish the weekend was supposed to be nice. It's not supposed to be nice. Today and tomorrow is supposed to be really nice, and then the rain returned this weekend, which is sad. But questions? You guys okay? All right. I think that's good for the day. We're almost at 3. Technically, we go to 3:15, but the next topic is big, and I don't want to start it now. All right. Have a good weekend, which seems weird to say on Wednesday. Some of you I might see. Some of you are actually any of you in my class tomorrow? Yeah. Some I might see tomorrow.
Yeah, it's very essential. So we got you for 2.
Yeah.
And we got the 2 new ones.
So you're going to stick this one out, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
sorry.
I don't understand the relationship. So this is,
That's me, and this is 1.
so it could be 1 and 1.
It could be. Oh, so 1 and 1 looks like.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But it's not. This is us, not him.
Well, so no, it's based on what's in the beginning. So, like 1 part of it, you have many inputs. But generally, you would have 1 part. Usually not.
But we can change it on the diagram.
Certainly, you could, yeah, well, the diagram doesn't enforce anything.
Okay.
You can put it, one of the things that I'll do when I examine your diagrams is I'll look to see if these are facing the right direction.
Oh, okay.
When you make the database of matters, on the diagram, yeah, it doesn't matter, you can put them in whatever direction, but I'll try to make sure that they're facing the right direction.
Okay, but I don't see
That one is not, so, let's see if I have it here. So if you want to make like this, one of these 1-to-1,
Yeah.
you could click on this and you right click and you can set beginning symbol.
Oh, okay.
So if I make that 1-to-1, notice it's now 1-to-1.
Okay. Gotcha.
It doesn't know whether you're doing it right or not. It just does what you said.
Okay.
So if I set, was it the beginning symbol? I'm going to do one or more.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure what it defines as beginning and what it defines as end sometimes, but so now it has the 3 pointing this way.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's a lot of this you have to like right click on the line, click on the line to select it, and then right click on it, and then you have your options.
Sounds great. Thank
Okay.
you.
And also, you have to download Visio from the website.
So which one, where are you? You're looking at the writing program?
I don't know my account.
So it should be, your username should be your student number. Have you registered everything yet?
No.
So you may have to register.
We're supposed to save this. And then it just logs, it just stays on our.
Right there, register. So your username is your student number. Right.
Okay, okay. I think I got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Small attendance related question.
sure.
I missed the class yesterday. Do you usually take it? Matter?
I don't, actually, I don't usually take it. Sometimes I do it at the beginning of the recording just to But, so what did we do? We just, yesterday we went over kind of the basics of what programming is. We looked at the, nope, have you ever played with Python? Well, you can stick it in micro.
And there's nothing in modules.
Right.
No, so what did I do? There is, so if we go to, I think what I did, one little piece of what I did is, so let's go to the next 110, right? Do you mean you missed the first one of these or the first?
Monday's class.
Oh, Monday. So actually what we did is we did databases.
Okay. So
And that's most of what we did. I went over the syllabus. I went over what the assignments would be, and I did that. I think that took most of the class.
if I had a trip for 1 week, I wouldn't be here. I would still be able to make up my assignments.
Yes,
I'll
one of
let you
the
know.
things that I said about the syllabus, I have dates on these, but they're approximate. I don't worry about things coming in late.
So
I can
as
help
long
you.
as I
Yeah.
coordinate, figure out what-
Yeah, just let me know when you're going to be going and we can do that.
So I missed a Monday class. Did you
Yeah.
guys talk anything like important?
So we went over the syllabus,
Okay.
right? And basically, as I was saying here, they showed the assignments, and basically, they have dates on them, but they're not to worry too much about the dates. They're kind of approximate. It doesn't, you know, as long as you get them in, you know, it's fine. Did the databases slides, which goes in overview of databases. It was mostly going over the syllabus, going over that PowerPoint with a lot of talking in between.
I see. So in this class, like, we're not gonna really talk about like actual deep part, like functionality of a database, like
Well, what kind of, we are talking some functionality, but what kind of?
like a coding part or something like that.
We'll do a little bit of SQL.
Okay.
So we'll do some SQL coding. It's not primarily a coding class. So.
Okay. Yeah, because all I want is like how to use MongoDB.
How to use Mongo?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is at the very end.
Yeah, because I'm working
So when we do Mongo, it will be somewhat coded because there's no way to not do it. Everything is JavaScript and command line.
Right. I actually looked it up their website, and then they have like their own tutorial.
They do, and actually their tutorial